Okay, welcome to United States History. Today, this would be our 8th class, and we're going to be finishing up on period/unit 7 and continuing on period 8. So we last left off for period 7. We talked about the Great Depression and, FDR or FDR's New Deal programs, or like the domestic programs that helped, recover some parts of the United States. We're going to continue on to speak, about the aftermaths of World War I and really America's role in the world after World War I. So first off, a little bit brief summarization of World War I, or the reason why we went to war, was World War I was an idealistic crusade to make the world safe for democracy. So, we have the very, I would say, important saying, or a saying that was very widely used during this time by FDR, right? The phrase "to make the world safe for democracy." That was like a main reason why we went into World War I. So after the war, the U.S. emerged from the war as the world's richest and most powerful nation, and all the European countries, since the war was fought on that land, or the European ground, there was a lot of destruction and just a lot of destruction of not only like the physical land, buildings, but also of their economy. So, the U.S.'s intervention into World War I also meant that the U.S. could no longer avoid not playing an active role avoid playing an active role in international affairs and for other countries. The first thing that happened, regarding foreign affairs, is really, really important after World War I, was the Dawes Plan. So Charles Dawes, he devised a plan to prevent Germany's economy from collapsing. Since he was like a businessman and also a statesman, also someone who, had experience in finance, he brought up the proposal to provide, $200 million from American banks to Germany. This was implemented in 1924, and this not only attracted American loans that totaled around $3 million, but it also meant that, Germany's economy would be brought up again, and this would positively affect, the other European countries and the United States, since, the United States was very active in trading and active in, the European countries' economy. We also have the Kellogg-Briand Pact in 1928. This pact was basically all the European countries and, America, and they just wanted a pact to make sure another world war doesn't happen again, and it was just their hope for peace and prosperity. But the thing is, about this pact is that it rested on the belief that the late 1920s economic boom would continue. Now, obviously, this isn't true because we know that the Great Depression happened. So this pact was kind of flawed in that sense. And we all know that, like, after World War I, a Second World War happened. So these are two very showing pictures of, Germany's state after World War I, because of, inflation. Because of inflation, money was useless, in the fact that, money wasn't really worth anything. So on the left, we see a woman burning money to create fire for a stove. On the right, we see, stacks of money being, used as some form of like entertainment for, children, like toys. So money was practically useless due to hyperinflation. After World War I, we also have, the development of fascist aggression between 1933 and 1939. The Wall Street crash and the Great Depression sent shock across the industrialized world. Fascist leaders in Italy, Germany, and Japan, they seized power by promising their country that they will revive the economic growth, punish traitors, minorities, and also restore national pride. I listed 3 kind of important figures that, were the cause of this fascist aggression, or the rise of fascist aggression. We have Benito Mussolini. He wanted to resurrect glories of the ancient Rome Empire for Italy, and he wanted to build a colonial empire in Africa. So Mussolini actually was very successful in ordering an invasion of Ethiopia. And although the League of Nations, which was established after the Versailles Treaty, after World War I with FDR and the European countries, although the League of Nations did give Mussolini a warning, they didn't really do anything. There was no source of enforcement. So Mussolini went on to create this invasion of Ethiopia. And this also inspired Adolf Hitler, who was also, his power was also rising, within Germany, as he spread this idea of like restoring the national pride of Germany, getting back their glory and victory after World War I. He saw Mussolini's attack, and he saw that the League of Nations didn't do anything. So then that encouraged him to defy the Versailles Treaty. And he ordered 35,000 German troops into the Rhineland, and the Rhineland, which was once, during this time, France's, since it was a buffer between France and Germany, and it had a prior war where France took this piece of land. He ordered the troops, and he took back the Rhineland. So he basically occupied this land. And again, many of the European powers warned him to not do anything, but they didn't actually do any physical, actions to prevent this from happening. And we also have the fascist aggression happening in Japan. Hideki Tojo, I believe that's how you pronounce it, was, the military leader, or you would say the person that was kind of like in charge or commander of, Japan during this time. A new kind of militaristic government was that they renounced the Washington Conference, and the Washington Conference was basically a conference before that happened during this time where it was basically kind of like this agreement between America, Japan, and many like Asian countries that like they would not try to stop each other from getting trade, accessing trade routes to China, or like stopping each other's economic opportunities within Asia. So not only that, they renounced that conference, and they also withdrew from the League of Nations. And in 1937, they also invaded northern China, which basically broke that promise that was formed in the Washington Conference. And this created this new beginning of Asia's involvement in World War II. Does anyone have any questions? I know this is like a very brief summary of kind of fascist aggression, but I think these are like very key points and key people that you should know. Ethan, you have a question?
I actually know how to pronounce the name.
Oh, can you pronounce it?
Hideki Tojo.
Okay, yeah, so it's Hideki Tojo. Yeah, so he was like the militaristic leader. Yep, thank you, Ethan. So I have these 3 pictures here. We have Mussolini, Adolf Hitler, and then Tojo. They're very kind of important leaders. While this outbreak of World War II did happen, I just, wanted to have this map, or like a list of, countries in each side. So we have the Allied powers, Soviet Union, Britain, US, France, China, Axis powers, Germany, Austria, Japan, Italy, and other countries. And on the kind of right is a map. And the blue countries are supposedly countries that kind of remained neutral. Okay, let me just. So America at first, at the outbreak of World War II, remained neutral because isolationism was very popular. Isolationism, or many American isolationists, believe that the United States just avoid being politically involved in European affairs and instead focused on
building America's economy and improving, America's domestic affairs, or just domestic, I guess, issues or problems that are happening within the borders of America rather than focusing on international stuff. Between 1935 and 1937, because of this isolationist kind of mindset, Congress passed a series of 3 neutrality acts banning the loaning and the sales and like the selling of weapons to nations at war. So like they also, they saw the how popular isolationism was, but I also, reference back to World War I and how this idea of like America selling, weapons to other countries was kind of the main reason why German submarines or U-boats would kind of, make surprise attacks on America. So they didn't want to involve themselves into another war. We also have another really important kind of speech that is very representative of this time, Roosevelt's quarantine speech. FDR recognized that the United States could not isolate itself from this fascist aggression, and they would have to be involved somewhat, or like they would have to be somewhat involved. Instead of isolationism, he believed that the United States should expand its roles in global affairs. But, obviously this speech failed to persuade many American isolationists. And this just proved to Roosevelt that, he could not successfully challenge public support for neutrality, and that neutrality would stay. This is on December 8th, 1940. This was like a very instrumental event on kind of this idea of America's involvement with World War II. So during this day, the Prime Minister of Britain, Winston Churchill, sent a message to FDR warning him that Great Britain was running out of supplies and money to continue fighting against Nazi Germany. On December 29th, 1940, FDR, in his fireside chats, over the radio, said that America must become an arsenal of democracy by providing materials to Britain. And he also asked Congress during this time to send war materials. And we see something really kind of interesting. He uses the word democracy again. This idea of like an arsenal of democracy, very different from, keeping the world safe from democracy, but it's very similar, I guess, ideas and ideals. So on March 11, 1941, Congress passed the act, and this basically, I would say, was very instrumental in getting America out of the Depression state, because American, Depression-ridden industries were now producing a lot of weapons to send to Britain and to fight, Hitler and Mussolini. However, although this act was passed, many Americans still wanted to stay out of World War II. I believe a poll during this time stated that around 80% of Americans still wanted to stay out of World War II. They didn't want anything to do with, such European affairs. That is until I guess this event that kind of changed many Americans' mindsets and just allowed for America to intervene into World War II. We have, the attack on Pearl Harbor, or just everybody knows this event as this Pearl Harbor. Because like a very brief kind of one sentence on why Pearl Harbor kind of happened. So FDR kind of saw that Japan was trying to, I would say, I wouldn't say invade, but trying to get a lot of materials on oil or just certain materials from in the Indochina region. And FDR ordered an embargo on trade with Japan. So they said, FDR said, no, we're not going to trade with Japan. And this embargo caused many Japanese leaders to make the fateful decision that the United States was against them. So they decided to attack the U.S. fleet at Pearl Harbor and also seize rich oil fields in the Dutch East Indies. On November 7th, 1941, at exactly 7:55 a.m., the first of 3 waves of planes attacked the United States Pacific Fleet. It sank or damaged around 18 ships and killed around 2,403 people. The next day, November 8th, FDR asked Congress for a declaration of war. And 4 days later, Germany and Italy would also declare war on the United States, motivating the United States to get more involved in the war. And we have, these very powerful images of kind of the strikes among the U.S. fleets and also, this harbor. So this idea of Pearl Harbor and the Japanese striking first also brought a lot of kind of fear, anger, and this sentiments of revenge against Japanese people and the country of Japan. So this kind of caused around 1942, around like that time or February that month, the passing of the Executive Order 9066, and this order basically said the military had to evacuate people of all Japanese ancestry to certain camps. Because of all this revenge, fear, and anger, it was very easy for many Americans and America in general to just displace these sentiments to this around 110,000 Japanese people living on the West Coast. So once this executive order was passed, Japanese Americans had around 48 hours to dispose of everything. So dispose of their businesses, property, just whatever they owned, and they had to pack their bags like one suitcase, and then they had to report to these army assembly centers. And during this time, they did a lot of things. They constructed a lot of buildings. A lot of things. It's just very like kind of hard work, like and chores. And it wouldn't be until 1988, after the Supreme Court case Korematsu versus the United States, that the Congress would issue a formal apology and would offer each camp survivor around $20,000 in reparations. But this time was fueled by a lot of xenophobia, racism, and there's a lot of discrimination due to these sentiments I listed above. And these two are kind of pictures of like the internment camps, and kind of we see very like depressing photos of the tag on certain these like human beings in general, and the barbed wire and the fences. Ethan, you have a question?
I was pretty sure I'm talking about the Pearl Harbor thing.
Mm-hmm.
I had a comment on that. I'm pretty sure there were no battleship. There were no like aircraft carriers that were destroyed in the bombing. I'm pretty sure.
Oh no, but like the aircraft carriers were the ones that sent the stuff. I think I meant like the aircraft carriers was like the Japanese aircraft carriers were the ones that sent this bombing of.
No, I mean like most of the American aircraft carriers didn't like get hurt, because I'm pretty sure someone was actually bringing them outside.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think what I wrote was like Japanese, like the fleets of Japanese airplanes were coming to Pearl Harbor. So I think I was talking about like the fleets as in like the ships or like whatever that was parked or outside the harbor.
And I'm pretty sure, the Pearl Harbor bombing also affected a lot of the more like plans, because I'm pretty sure there was actually a war plan that actually required ships from the Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, so
to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So while I would love to go on and on about like World War II and like each battles, I think just very important thing about how the Allied powers gained its victory in Europe. Their first, like during the first few battles, FDR decided to focus on Japan because Japan was the one who kind of brought America into World War II. They did the Pearl Harbor attack, but FDR and Winston Churchill and the British Prime Minister believed that, you know, we should take care of Hitler and Germany first, and that would, since, you know, Germany and Italy was working very like side by side, that if you took care of, you know, Germany first, Italy would be along with it. So FDR and Churchill changed their plan. They decided to focus on Germany. During this, very instrumental in the victory of Europe was this idea of the big three diplomacy. Additionally, kind of this diplomacy stood for these like three important figures that were very, you know, that were very like big powers in the Allied kind of like this team. So we have FDR, Churchill, and Joseph Stalin of the USSR, or the Soviet Union. And these three, I guess I would say, countries or people were kind of, I wouldn't say like the masterminds behind this, the D-Day attack, or the battle that would be kind of the deciding factor of who would win World War II. So the D-Day attack or invasion of 1944 on June 6th was an Allied invasion of France. Since during this time, Germany had already occupied France, so there was an Allied invasion of France. And General Dwight D. Eisenhower, he commanded both American, British, and Canadian troops, and they stormed the beaches of Normandy and liberated Paris 3 months later. And so because, you know, they were occupying much of Paris during this time, and then basically the American, British, and Canadian troops after D-Day occupied much of what was once, you know, German occupation of Paris. Hitler was kind of, in a way, like forced to surrender because, you know, he lacked troops, he lacked supplies, just didn't have enough against these three kind of powers. So as he was faced with American and British troops from the west and also Russian troops from the east, Hitler supposedly committed suicide, and that would be kind of the end of, I would say, Germany's aggression in World War II. And Italy's kind of like, I guess, aggression in World War II, or like part in World War II, would also end sooner or later after Hitler committed suicide. On February 1945, Roosevelt and Churchill agreed to the temporary division of Germany in exchange for Russia joining the war against Japan. So although they have defeated both, you know, Germany and Italy at this time, they still had to go against Japan, which is I guess farther away from, you know, the access to European countries, since it was literally kind of in another let's say continent. So these two are good pictures depicting D-Day, or just troops storming the beaches. Someone said Italy switched sides in the middle. Yes, because they already have one ally, Germany, being kind of, you know, already surrendering. Someone asked, are there bombs in the second picture? These are aircraft carriers that supposedly held kind of bombs. There's just a lot of stuff, you know, a lot of new technology going on. Like, that's something really important to know. You know, World War II brought great advancements in technology. We have radar, we have kind of radio, speeches, just a lot of things that World War II technology also brought. So in the home front, we have you know, both women. We're going to be focusing on both women and African Americans' involvement in the home front. So for women, around 350,000 American women served in uniform, volunteering for the Women's Army Corps, or the WACs. Women drove trucks, repaired planes, rigged parachutes, served as radio and telephone operators. 70,000 women were you know, helped in the Army and were Navy nurses. and around 6 million additional female workers entered the labor force in America, producing weapons, producing planes, just producing a lot of things that were very important for the war. For African Americans, around 700,000 African Americans left the South during time of the Great Depression and World War II. But the thing is, although they looked to, industries or more industrial cities for jobs, there was still a lot of racial prejudice that limited kind of their social and economic gains. The executive order 8802 that was passed was very kind of important, as this order provided full and I quote, equitable participation of all workers in defense industries. And this was also called during this time the Economic Emancipation Proclamation, because it meant that certain industries, or like kind of the economy or whatever job you work at, it can't discriminate by race, they can't discriminate by race, which is very important because African Americans were now able to take jobs that they weren't able to take before. And we also have, in the Army, we have around 1.2 million Black soldiers and sailors that fought in segregated units. So we still, again, have this segregated unit thing where white troops were in one camp and then Black troops were in the other. But, because of, still racial prejudice that filled these in America and also, in the Army, many African Americans supported what was called the WWII campaign. And this WWII campaign basically meant victory in two fronts. One, victory over fascism in Europe, and also victory over discrimination in the United States. Ethan, you have a question?
I'd like to say something. Can you go back to the a few pages of pictures of D-Day? Yeah, the pictures of D-Day. I want to see.
Oh, yes.
Those things you said were torpedoes, I'm pretty sure are actually called barrage balloons. They're supposed to block aircrafts, make it harder to maneuver through the area.
I don't think I mentioned they were torpedoes, but are you talking about these things here?
I'm pretty sure.
All right, yeah, so that answers someone's question. I don't know whose question it was, but that answered David's question. Are there bombs on the second picture? Okay, thank you, Ethan. So these are two kind of posters. We have, the double victory for democracy, and also this very famous picture of, her name is supposed to be Rosie the Riveter, and she kind of it's kind of like almost like propaganda poster, basically saying, we women can do it. While the men is going to war, we can rise up and take many industrial jobs and work to actively create materials or create things that, our troops and our army need for the war. So, this is a very famous kind of picture, and it's still kind of used in some like media today. Yeah, and also, it shows kind of women being strong. So I think that's like why it's very kind of groundbreaking, and this idea that women too can support the war effort. Okay. So what really led to, I guess, the surrender of Japan, or just the final, I guess, stretch of World War II, has got to be the use of the atomic bomb. So on April 12, 1945, Franklin D. Roosevelt passed away. And 2 weeks later, President Truman was informed that the Manhattan Project is developing an atomic bomb. On July 16, 1945, the Manhattan Project successfully tested an atomic weapon at a desert in New Mexico, and it was successful, meaning that it did cause, it did lead to the results that they wanted. So Truman had the, I guess, option to choose whether or not to use nuclear weapons, and Truman chose to use nuclear weapons, and he sent 2 atomic bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki on September 2nd, 1945, it was the formal Japanese surrender. And this kind of, I guess, date meant that, you know, the World War II was over, but this kind of age of, I guess, nuclear weapons or this atomic age and the Cold War would begin sooner or later. Someone asked, what is the Manhattan Project? Rose, the Manhattan Project was actually a project based in Manhattan. It was basically like this kind of building where certain scientists were trying to, you know, figure out how to use atomic weapons or how to use elements that, or in chemistry, just science in general, to develop weapons that you didn't really need to, I guess, control or didn't really need to manually use, but rather, you know, something you can just like drop and it would cause the effect that you want. They were very important in developing this nuclear weapons and atomic bomb. These two pictures, this is the, on the left, it's the after of Japan. On the right, it's like the clouds and the effect of the dropping of the atomic bomb. As you see, it's a lot of radioactivity. It was very dangerous for Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and it was very depressing as well, seeing, you know, certain families or just like certain populations being very affected. I also listed kind of like, you know, reasons that Truman debated or many Americans debated over whether or not to drop the bomb or whether or not we should use the atomic bomb. And I guess the most popular was the idea that like Japan was going to surrender anyway, so there was no reason to drop the bomb, and there's a lot of it. Explosion would kill too many, and yeah, there's just a lot of kind of reasons why it's against, but some reasons for dropping the bomb. Truman wanted an unconditional surrender, so he wanted kind of just the surrender of Japan right away, and also he didn't want to fight anymore, like he didn't want to use any more materials or soldiers anymore, and you know, an actual invasion of Japan would just be too time consuming, and it would actually have a lot of casualties. And also the atomic bomb also, you know, would also be able to scare the Soviet Union, and it shows the Soviet Union that, you know, we're a force to be, you know, reckoned with or dealt with. Okay, so we're gonna move on to period 8, which lasts from 1946 to 1952, and a little less than a decade, but this is also a very important period. So we have, you know, the beginnings of the Cold War, right? We talked about the end of World War II and left the beginnings of the Cold War and the atomic age. So while American leaders focused on building peaceful world order, the USSR and Soviet Union focused on building a buffer zone from East Europe to protect their own country from invasion. So why did this happen? Because the US emerged from World War II as a powerful and prosperous country, while the Soviet Union suffered from heavy losses because, you know, they were fighting on European land and much of their border. We also have the Iron Curtain, that like a really popular phrase, a really important phrase that was kind of that was mentioned by Winston Churchill. So the Red Army, it's another word for, you know, Soviet Union's army, installed new pro-Russian governments along like the Eastern Europe, and across Eastern Europe, you know, many communist officials imprisoned many minorities, traitors, just people in general, right? And this started the spread of communism in the East. Winston Churchill in 1946, in a speech, mentioned that, and he warned Americans that an Iron Curtain was about to descend across the nation. So an Iron Curtain, we can explain what that meant later, what that means like next, not later. Ethan, you have a question?
say something about like the bomb? I actually know the names of the bomb.
Do you want to share with us the names
The
of
first
the bomb?
one is called Little Boy. The first bomb was called Little Boy.
All right. I guess if you want to share, you can like put in the comments or.
Sorry, my grandma was just talking. Okay.
It's fine.
The first one was called Little Boy. And the second one was called Fat Man. They were actually different types of bombs. The Fat Man was the same as the Trinity test, which was the test they used to test if the bomb was going to work.
Interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah.
And dropping the bomb saved more people's lives than it would save more people's lives instead if they had just did an invasion of Japan's homeland, it would kill more people, but
Right.
The bomb killed less people.
Right. Yeah, that was one of the arguments, for using the bomb. Continuing on, what this iron current meant is that it's like the separation of Europe, right? So this iron curtain, or this like Eastern Bloc, right? This iron curtain would split between Western Europe and Eastern Europe, and basically said the iron curtain that separated East Europe, right? Eastern Europe is where all the countries that were kind of controlled by communism were, and the west of the Iron Curtain, or the Western European countries, were countries that were pro-Western, that kind of supported democracy and not communism. So that's what the separation of the countries by the Iron Curtain. So we also have, since the spread of communism in Eastern Europe brought a lot of fears to many countries, especially America, we have this naming, or this phrase, containment, that is going to be very widely used in period A. Secretary of Commerce Henry Wallace urged a policy of containment, meaning that the United States should adopt a strategic policy blocking the expansion of Soviet influence, or just blocking the expansion of communism. So I guess the first kind of policy under containment is the Truman Doctrine, and he wanted $400 million in military and economic aid to help Greece and Turkey. And also the Truman Doctrine also articulated a new foreign policy to the United States to, and I quote, support free people who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or outside pressure. So this brought a new responsibility to the United States. The United States now needed to not to kind of be the police or be the person to support free people and free people from, I guess, undemocratic practices or just subjugation and violence. We also have the Marshall Plan. Secretary of State George Marshall convinced Truman to commit around $13 billion to help rebuild 16 Western European countries after World War II. We also have the establishment of the NATO alliance. In 1949, countries came together, mostly many Western countries, United States, Canada, and those countries and more. They wanted to have this almost pact and agreement that we should have collective security, and that we should just make sure that each one of our countries are safe, and that another world war doesn't really happen again. Because of this NATO alliance, USSR, or Soviet Union, made the Warsaw Pact, and they linked Russia, or the Soviet Union, with 7 Eastern European countries, and that became their own kind of NATO alliance. We also have the event of the Berlin aircraft. So after World War II, the Allied powers divided Germany into 4 occupation zones. In 1948 of June, these 4 zones, the countries decided to just put them all together, and that would form the German Republic, and that would form just Germany itself. But the thing was that this only was kind of half of Germany. The other half of kind of Germany, or kind of that was part of the more to the east, was kind of controlled by the USSR, or like Stalin. So Stalin cut off the Western Highway and rail access to West Berlin from that part of, from the Germany that was controlled by USSR. And obviously, this meant that the people that were there didn't have access to supplies, food, or just things or necessities they needed. So because of this, Truman had two kind of like options. One, to just withdraw, right, and just say like, oh, like, we don't want anything to do with Germany. USSR can control it. Or two, he sent aircrafts in that brought food and fuel every day and just like necessities to people that were in West Berlin. So this event, marked kind of like a very important part for like very important things for America. One, it showed, I guess, America's power, right? Like America's power, sending food every single day. And also it shows America's insistence to kind of keep people free, or try to spread democracy. We have left, a picture of this, right? This kind of splitting of Germany, or this kind of Soviet controlled land here, and also the America, Britain, and France, those four occupational zones combining to make the German Republic. We also have containment happening in Asia. So our first example is Japan. So, right after, Japan and the World War II, General Douglas MacArthur adopted a new constitution in Japan, created a democratic government. American aid helped Japan rebuild factories, launch new electric industries, and because these improved relations, U.S. and Japan gradually became allies. For China, a civil war divided China, and communists led by Mao Zedong that spread across the country. On October 1st, 1949, Mao announced the birth of the People's Republic of China. So it means that Chiang Kai-shek was once the person who kind of controlled China, or a part of the Nationalist Party. Him and his supporters fled to Taiwan. And in 1950, Mao signed a treaty with the Soviet Union, and they now were both kind of communist countries working together. So because of this, and Truman was kind of like in disbelief. He was like, what? Like, how did this happen? Like, we just lost just this land of China. How did this happen? Truman saw this, but he didn't want to recognize, Mao Zedong's or People's Republic of China as the representative of China. So he recognized Taiwan as representative of all China. So he represented he recognized Taiwan as the representative of China. So he saw Chiang Kai-shek and the Nationalist Party representing China. We also have containment, another part of containment in Asia, the Korean War. So after World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union, or the USSR, decided to divide Korea at the 38th parallel. The USSR supported a communist government in the north, while the United States supported a pro-Western government in the south. On June 25th, 1950, because of certain reasons, North Korea attacked South Korea. And Truman saw this invasion as a test of containment. So he, instead of, telling Congress that we should declare a war, he appealed to the United Nations, which was kind of like this new foreign group that, wanted to spread peace, prosperity, making sure there's not another war. He appealed to the United Nations to intervene and wanted to provide international assistance to SOCO, or South Korea. General Douglas MacArthur, which was the commander, he recaptured all of South Korea and crossed the 38th parallel to unite the entire Korean peninsula. So with the aid of the UN troops, he recaptured South Korea, and he wanted to bring back the whole peninsula together. On November 25th, China launched a counterattack since China intervened, and he drove the UN forces back to South Korea. And this kind of, back and forth with China, Soviet Union, North Korea, and the UN, the United States, and South Korea would continue for 2 more years with many disputes. One is very famous was the General Douglas MacArthur versus Truman, as Truman wanted to just maintain South Korea, trying to keep peace in South Korea. MacArthur wanted to unite the whole peninsula, and that brought many disputes and just only continue the war. It wouldn't be long after these 2 years that North Korea signed an armistice, and it provided a ceasefire, since there wasn't really a clear victory, and that caused the splitting, of North Korea and South Korea along the 38th parallel and what we see today. So we also have, I guess, because of all these communist expansion, because all these fears, a second Red Scare happening in the United States. So the reason was for a couple of reasons. There's 1, a fear of radicalism due to loss of China, 2, military stalemate in North Korea, and 3, the USSR exploding their first atomic bomb, which meant that other countries had access to nuclear weapons, not only the United States. So this brought these sentiments of the Red Scare, fear of radicalism and just fear of communism in the United States. So because of this, there was this loyalty program where within the United States federal government, loyalty boards investigated 3 million federal employees, dismissing 490 workers, but many just failed to uncover any cases of espionage or any cases of government officials being spies for other countries. We also have the House of Un-American Activities Committee that was established in 1938, and they were to investigate foreign subsidiaries. Main thing is the same thing as this loyalty program. They just wanted to make sure that people weren't working for other countries and being spies that were working in the United States. So we also have this committee also making a lot of investigations on Hollywood, since many writers and producers and directors were I guess said to have be said to conspire with I guess other communist countries to make the United States worse, or to do something to the United States. And the most famous were the Hollywood 10, who basically said they didn't want to answer any questions because obviously they were not conspiring against the United States or conspiring with other countries. And these 2 are really good pictures of, I guess, just these sentiments of the Red Scare this period of time. The Red Scare also was called McCarthyism. So McCarthyism started with Joseph McCarthy telling the American foreign policy, telling America that the foreign policy failures could be traced to communist influence in the State Department. And he said that he had a list of 205 people that were part of the State Department that were linked to the Communist Party. However, what is very bad about this accusations was the fact that he failed to uncover a single communist, and this practice of making accusations of disloyalty without evidence would soon be called McCarthyism. And his decline, Joseph McCarthy's decline, would begin around the spring of 1954, where he had these public, televised testimonies, right, where 20 million people watched, where he bullied the witnesses, twisted the testimonies, and introduced phony evidence. And this turned public opinion against him, and that really led to this decline of McCarthyism, also decline of just the belief that there's the State Department had certain number of people that were linked to the Communist Party. And that's a picture of McCarthy. So something that like I want to end the class with, right, is this idea that like something very interesting that some people might know. Dr. Seuss, who is like a very famous poet, like for writing children's books, or famous writer, he was very active during this period of like World War II, and just during this time around like period 8. He did a lot of political cartoons, wrote a lot of books, you know, surrounding, you know, America and its relationship with like European countries, or America and its relationship with the other people that were fighting in World War II. And he was just like two things I would like to share. I think, you know, it's very interesting how he points out, you know, the irony in, I guess, us, an irony against America trying, you know, intervening in World War II by providing an arsenal of democracy while also being very discriminatory or having xenophobic sentiments during certain like our populations, but also other populations. Would anyone, I guess, like have any questions, or does anyone want to analyze these political cartoons, or anyone want to share something interesting they learned today? Helena said, didn't Dr. Seuss write a book about turtles using others as a term relating Hitler? Yes, yeah. So Dr. Seuss did a lot of like these books that, you know, were very kind of very like reflective or representative of like this time of World War II, and also time of Hitler, anti-Semitism, discrimination and stuff. He also did a lot of political cartoons relating like the internment camps of Japanese Americans. You know, America was like obviously hypocritical. Does anyone else have any questions, or like want to just like talk about these political cartoons, what they thought about today's lesson, or what they just think about, you know, the atomic war bombings, or like America's involvement in World War II, or just Americans' involvement in like Asia or overseas? Helena said she thought Dr. Seuss was interesting. Yeah, I think you should like if you want, I can post more articles on like stuff about Dr. Seuss and the work he did. I guess if there are no more any questions or anything, we can end the class here. I have, you know, kind of like this slide that says next week we're going to be learning, the first thing we're going to be learning is the Eisenhower era, or the presidency of Dwight D. Eisenhower, the the commander that led D-Day. And this era is very interesting because there's a lot of economic prosperity, also a lot of changes in American culture and American society. Well, that's all for us today. I hope y'all learned something new about World War II, or something that you haven't learned before, something you found interesting. I'll see y'all next week.